Hello and welcome to episode 77 of the Page One podcast, which is also our first episode of this new 8th season. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek. As many seasons as Game of Thrones.
Indeed. And hopefully not with the sort of diminishing returns as well.
So we've only got improvements each season.
Exactly. If this is your first episode of the Page One podcast, thanks for joining us. At the Page One podcast, we'd like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process, how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And as I say, this is episode 77, so there is a big back catalogue of all sorts of great authors, journalists, screenwriters, comic writers, video game writers. So do take a moment to go and check that out, because there's sure to be some names that you're interested in there. Have you been up to anything while we've been off air, Tarek?
What have I been up to? Watched a lot of TV, played some video games.
Getting ready for your own book publication, of course.
Your own book publication, of course, yes. Done a lot of redrafting. It's been fun to start with, and then last for quite a while. It realized how many times I had to go. I think people are right when they say you're kind of ready when you're sick to death of your own book. Definitely sick to death of it, so it's ready. I think it's ready to go now.
Excellent. Yeah, that's Welcome to Cooper, which you can now pre-order, I believe, through Amazon.
Anyone who likes a good crime novel, or doesn't like a crime novel but likes reading books, or doesn't like reading books, just wants to give me some money, just go to Amazon and pre-order. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, no, I have read it and it is great. If you're a fan of sort of Mayor of Easttown, or True Detective, then definitely check that out.
I will take those comparisons, Marco. Thank you very much.
And I, meanwhile, have just been watching football and enjoying that. So sorry to our English listeners, but being a fan of Italy, I quite enjoyed the whole tournament.
Marco's had he's had ups and downs, but
ultimately it was a month of horrible stress, as that's what football is, and me questioning why I like football. But then at the very end of it, it was good.
The thought of having to edit podcasts on top of that once was just too much.
No, exactly. But anyway, enough from us. This is a writing podcast, and that's why you're here. And we've got a great guest to kick off this season.
We do indeed. We are chatting with Caroline Hulse, who she has her website's actually very good and has a number of facts about her, which I'm going to read out a selection of just now.
Excellent.
To get a flavour of who she is. She lives in Manchester, in England. She worked in human resources for 17 years, wrote books at night, never thought writing could be a real job, but then was offered a book deal back in 2017. So fairly new to the writing scene. She actually started off as a suspense writer, and she pitched her books as suspense thrillers, and was told by her editor and her agent that actually they're more of a comedy.
Yeah.
You've not nailed the suspense at all, but you have nailed the comedy part. Because that was what she went down that route instead.
Yeah, we chat to her about that, and sort of starting out in one genre and then ending up in another, and also about the work in HR and how that's actually helped her. You can imagine that working in HR, you'll see a lot of characters and a lot of conflict as well, which obviously is always great for stories. We chat to her about all of that, and we chat to her about her new book, All the Fun of the Fair, which is just out. So you can hear about that and then hopefully order it or go and pick it up from your local bookshop afterwards.
Yep, absolutely. It's a really fun read.
But we'll get straight into the podcast now after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, which I should say is currently undergoing its second printing. So we don't have stock right now, but you can, if you go to our website, have a look at the pretty pictures, and also put your name down for a discount when the second print run comes in.
New and improved.
New and improved, indeed. There are improvements.
Some nice tweaks there for taking everything on board, and the obviously sold out print run, first one. Very pleased with that, but second one's even better.
Definitely. So we'll get straight into it, and we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest as well.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to be a writer?
Yes, I did, but then you get a bit distracted along the way, don't you? So I think I also wanted to be an awful lot of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I didn't actually become a professional full-time writer till I was 41. So yeah, it took me a little while.
Yeah, because you worked for a long time, I think, in HR as well. But were you writing throughout that period as well?
I was, but I generally stopped and started a lot. So I'd get really into a book, I'd love it, I'd work really hard, I'd finish it, I'd get all the agent rejections, then I'd decide I wasn't ever writing again, and then I wouldn't write again for the year or two. So like to say I was writing consistently during that time, wouldn't be completely accurate. But yeah, I did write several books.
7 books, was it?
Just several, so I think 5.
Several, so. Well, that's still a lot of books to write. Because I think I'd read in an interview that you gave someone that finding the time to write when working, you kind of almost had to carve out the time, and so you'd write on a Sunday and a Monday night, but by Tuesday you were too tired from work. So was that quite a big thing, getting in that kind of routine of when to write around the day job?
Definitely. I think it's so easy as a writer to not write. I don't know if you find that. There's always a reason not to. You're always too tired, or actually haven't got enough time. And I think I didn't realise how effective it was actually when I started doing it. It was just my routine. I just found that by Tuesday I wasn't very good. But actually, in retrospect, looking back, writing every Monday and Monday night and Sunday was just a really good way of keeping up that keeping up the continuity of the book without just burning out at the same time.
And during that period, am I right in saying you were writing suspense novels at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I started writing crime, and then I think I thought all my novels were some version of crime or suspense. But that is not the feedback I got when I actually got an agent and an editor. So I was, writing what I thought was crime. And my first novel that came out actually was, when I wrote the first draft, it was meant to be psychological suspense, but it was published as humour. So I think that shows that maybe I didn't have a great grasp of genre.
And so on that search for the agent, I mean, how, did you go through that sort of hellish part where you have loads and loads of rejections, or how long did it take you to find the agent?
Yeah, so all my books got rejected. I had a tiny bit of success in my first book in that it was longlisted for a kind of search for a bestseller competition. It didn't go any further than that. I didn't get an agent, but that told me it couldn't be absolutely terrible because it had been picked up for that. So that gave me a tiny bit of confidence. But no, I really only got form agent rejection letters and stuff for the first few books. And then the book before the one that got published, there was an agent interested in that one. And she didn't actually take it on in the end. So that was, again, through the slush pile talent pool. But she didn't take it on, but she put me in touch with an editor by then who was interested, and then she put me in touch with another agent. So it was through the slush pile, but it was it wasn't absolutely direct.
What is it that when you're getting those rejections and you've written 5 novels that haven't gone anywhere, how do you still find that will to keep going forward with it?
I mean, I didn't. That's what. So for a time, I'd stop and I'd lick my wounds, and it would only be I'd be on holiday or something. So I was concentrating on my career a bit more, and I'd go, I'm not doing that anymore. It's too painful. And then an idea would just come to me a little bit later, and then I'd just kind of go, oh, maybe this one. Because I always wrote for myself, but it was definitely with the aim of getting published. So I think, I don't think I'd be one of those writers who would write books forever if there was no chance of anyone seeing them. I think I would do some form of writing, but I definitely wrote for publication. So yeah, I think I just had to let enough time go by, to be honest, to let the rejections kind of die down a little bit and then get another idea and then start again. And in a way, I know it's quite a depressing story in some ways, but it's also quite a positive one, because whilst it did take me ages, I didn't know anyone in the industry. I didn't do any creative writing courses. I'd never met another author until I got my book deal. So it can happen. It just takes a while. And I think when I've spoken to friends and people who've done creative writing courses, that kind of thing, I think there are shortcuts maybe to getting to where I've got to, where you do get introduced to agents and that kind of thing. And I didn't go down any of those routes at all. And you can still get published this way. But as I say, I finished my first book at 22 and first got published at 41. So it was, quite a long journey.
And when you look back, and this may be a question you can't answer, but when you look back at the books that got rejected and the one that then found your agent, etc., do you know what the difference was? Like, can you see something in the writing, or is it just a case of honing your craft over time?
I think it's partly honing craft, but I think it's partly, I think, as I said, I think I wrote in a sort of mix of genres. I think the difficulty is, if you're just a reader, I mean, I read a lot. The books that do well aren't necessarily books that are typically taken on by agents and editors. So they tend to be the outliers, and that tends to be why they do really well. So if you're reading whatever piece of literary fiction or whatever has done really well that year, it's probably done really well because it's original. But what you don't see is the other thousands of books that were published that were quite strange, that didn't do well. So I don't think I thought that much about genre. I just thought you just need to write a good book. I wasn't savvy at all on what it was and what I was writing. And I think that's where maybe if I'd had more industry knowledge and things, it might have helped. But also I did get better. But by the time my fifth book got published, by that stage I had the agent who was able to help me craft it and said, and she was right. She said, this is funny. It's it's probably not thrilling enough to be a psychological thriller. It's not, but you can bump up the humour. And I never really thought I was a funny writer. I just thought I did a few throwaway lines. But once you get that kind of permission and you get that angle and someone saying, if you aim there, it's much more marketable. I just wanted to write, whatever that was really, as long as I found it interesting, entertaining. I still plan to write thrillers one day and try and dial down the comedy as well. So, but without that steer, you're kind of flailing a little bit.
I suppose there's a balance, isn't there? Because you, like you said there, you always want to write something that you are genuinely interested in. I think you can also feel the other way if you sort of too single-mindedly go after a market or something, if it's not something that you absolutely believe in as well. We've probably read books that have actually been published that way, but you can kind of tell that it isn't something that the author themselves believed in, really. It doesn't feel quite genuine enough. So having that interest in your own writing, I suppose, is always going to be key.
Yeah, I think if it doesn't entertain you, it's a long time to spend doing something. Yeah. Particularly because even if you're under contract, theoretically I could deliver a book under contract to my publishers, but they might say that's not what we wanted, and then you're always in danger of working for nothing. But then in some ways it doesn't feel like work because it's pleasurable. So if you're not enjoying what you're writing, I imagine it's pretty soul-destroying.
Yeah. And so you've found success at last, and then you're still working in the HR job at this point. So how long was it from first book to, because I understand now you're a full-time writer, HR jobs in the bin, and how long did that take then?
It might come back. So for about a year or two, once I got my agent, I think, and the stage I was at in my HR career, I'd started taking more career breaks to write. So I'd taken 3 months off in one job. I had a really nice boss who let me just take 3 months unpaid. And then that gave me a bit of confidence, and I took some time off between jobs. So I've moved to a contract model where I was doing working on a daily basis for an organisation. So I just let that lapse at the point when I got the book deal, because, well, even at the point I got the book deal, I didn't really realise, I never really thought you could actually be a full-time writer. I knew some people were, but I thought that was really unusual. So I didn't understand how things work with foreign rights and that kind of thing, and that I might actually earn enough to be able to sustain myself for a few years. And, you know, at the point I realised that, I sort of thought, you know, it's now or never. And I'm quite lucky in the sense that I don't have kids. I'm a little bit older, so I'd already, you know, got a house, etc. So I think I was in a good position to take the risk, though I still expect to be back in HR at some point. So I need to kind of make sure my skills stay. Well, I think I've let them lapse a little bit, but I'll have to do some kind of remedial stuff. But I still think it's, you know, it is a privilege to be able to do this job, and I don't know how long I'll be able to do it full time for. Because I think, you know, unless you have got like an independent wealth, or you're very lucky and stuff, you know, it's you know, there are easier ways to make a living, I think.
Or you land a Netflix deal or something like that. Yeah.
It's something that's always made me laugh, is that, you know, for films and books, you put so much time into one item that you make so little back from in the end. And it's and how many other jobs would you spend a year crafting something which you maybe get in advance of, you know, what's like a typical advance, 10 grand or something from? And it just seems so bizarrely weighed against the writer. I don't know why there's not more. I mean, I guess it's obviously a money problem, but it just seemed very unfair that the amount of time and effort you put into a piece of work is not really fairly reflected in the remuneration, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's supply and demand, though, isn't it? This is my HR hat.
Yeah,
it is.
You've not lost your skills.
Yeah, it's the economic model. It's not ideal for those of us, I think, on the middle list and those trying to get started. But I still think you could pay everyone £1. I hope there's no publishers listening to this. And I still think there'll be a lot of people who go, I want that job, let me have it. And the fact that books, unfortunately, you know, we've got a situation where books aren't valued hugely in terms of, you know, so many of them being sold at, you know, 99p, etc. now. You know, publishers they've got their own business models, haven't they? Yeah, but I think, I don't know, it would be nice, I think, to think, I certainly struggle with that, coming from a job where I had a salary, where a certain amount goes into my salary at the end of every month. And, you know, there might be people who are a little better at your job than you, or a little bit worse. So they might be paid a little bit more or a little bit less, but the disparities and the way the model works is incredibly different and causes a lot of uncertainty. And I think, you know, there's a lot of talk in the industry at the moment about diversity and how to attract ranges of voices from different backgrounds and stuff. And I think it's things like this and the amount of uncertainty that comes with it, even if you're successful, is part of the reason it's quite hard for them to attract a range of diverse voices, because you've got to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think that is the difficulty, that you have to be able. It's so difficult to afford to do it. And that's the problem. But at the same time, I think, you know, if you speak to agents, they're busier than they've ever been in terms of people sending them stuff.
I guess a barrier to entry to be a writer is probably the lowest of many other arts or most other jobs, I suppose, and that is literally, you know, pen, a bit of paper or laptop, and you can, you know, anyone can be a writer, you know, in the same way anyone can be a painter, I suppose, but that's, you know, obviously the skill has to be there, but you don't need to buy a lot of kit, you can do it in your spare time. I suppose it is that yin yang of, as you say, Marco, there's tons, especially pandemic wise, agents are just getting slammed at the moment with people who've written books, and you've got Amazon folk putting books out themselves and stuff. So it's just a very crazy market, I guess, which is not great for people trying to make a lot of money on the writer's point of view.
Yeah, we all still do it. Everyone still does it, don't they?
Yeah, that's
totally.
it, exactly.
It's that drive to write. I suppose it's what you were saying earlier, though. Even though you were, you know, you'd write something, you wouldn't get anywhere with it, but you still had that drive inside you that you had to write, you know, even if you weren't sure there was a future in it or not for you.
Yeah, I think I think what you want, and of course you don't get this, is what you want is someone to go, you know, that book, you know, don't worry, it won't be that one, but with one after or two more.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I suffer this in the rest of life as well. I want to know exactly what the future holds. And that's a terrible thing, you know, right? So it's terrible in this job. But also, I suppose, if I'd known the one I was writing might not have got published, and if someone had said, you've got to keep doing it, but it's going to be 20 years, that would have been quite depressing to hear as well. You've got to feel like it's closer than that, I suppose.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then when you gave up the HR job, I read that, you know, you had this dream of being able to work at home in your pajamas, but then suddenly quickly realised that it was you missed that sort of office environment and that 9-to-5 structure kind of thing.
It was awful. It was awful. I don't expect any sympathy, but I achieved my dreams and suddenly realised that this was not wasn't what I expected. First month or two was amazing. First month or two was just brilliant. I was like, yeah, this is it. I love it. And I was like, oh, why am I a bit lonely? And why am I a little bit down? And things got a lot better again. I got a lot more equilibrium when I started hiring a desk in an office, and I just had a reason to leave the house and a reason to speak to people over the course of the day, because it is quite an isolating job. And when it's not going well and things, just getting out of your own head is helpful. And I think it is a job where you're in your own head a lot of the time. Yeah. And I don't know if it is just that I always worked in an office before that, or if it is just that I'm maybe slightly more extroverted, because I've got a lot of friends who would just leave them in, you know, their office in the house, and they are delighted, and they just hope no one rings the door, and that they're happy with that. But it didn't work for me. And then the irony, of course, the pandemic started, and here I am back in my spare room.
And did you keep the routine, the kind of 9-to-5 idea, Monday to Friday? Did you transfer that into your writing world? You know, do you have days off? Do you treat it like a job type thing? I
treat it like a job, because it's so easy to. It's so easy to not write, and it's so easy to get the fear. I think so much of what you're writing isn't very good at the early stages, or so much of what I'm writing. I don't mean to speak for you.
The man's writing incredible stuff.
So much of what you're writing isn't very good, and you have to. I always find it easier to write if I've written the day before. So when I'm doing a first draft, I write every day until that's finished. And I try not to even have a single day off, because I have to kind of outrun the feeling that it's a bit rubbish. And then once you've got something to work with, it's just 20 times easier. Yep. So I tend to work every day, to be honest, but I tend to do short days. So I am less tired than I was when I did a normal job, because even though I work 7 days a week, I tend to knock off about 2:00 and then go and do other stuff. So that's how it works for me. But I think you can battle with yourself. I think so much about the writing stuff is a mental game. And I think if you start giving yourself options of, maybe I'll just have this morning off, and then you can realize 2 weeks have gone by, you're quite dissatisfied because you haven't achieved anything, and your book suddenly feels quite a scary thing to approach. So it works for me, but I know it doesn't feel very creative. I'm sure there's a more creative way of writing books than how I do it, which is spreadsheets and schedules and that kind of.
What you say there about sort of outrunning the fear with that first is a very good. I think that's very good advice, because certainly when I write, you know, it's very easy to doubt what you're writing in that initial draft, and I can start obsessing on like tiny details and start trying to make that tiny bit perfect. But actually, like you say, it can sometimes be much better just to push through and just think, right, okay, that needs fixed, but I'll fix it come the second draft or whatever. I mean, what is your process? You said spreadsheets. Do you plan your books before you start writing them?
Yeah, I plan in a lot of detail on spreadsheets. So I'm an extreme planner, which is why it's quite frustrating that still when I write them, then they all go out the window after that. But I kind of need to plan out to understand what a first draft looks like. I've always done that. Just to make sure I've got like a story arc, to make sure I know where all my characters have got a journey that they go on, and just to make sure that, pacing was something I always found quite challenging. So I just try and do that. And I think there's a couple of books in the past where I've approached it where I've not planned, and I've thought, right, I've planned to about 60% through, and then I think, right, there's some stuff goes on there, and then I plan the end from 90%, and I think I'll just work out what's happening between 60 and 90%. And sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. If if you haven't mapped out, in my mind, it's just how I work.
Yeah.
If I hadn't mapped out the whole book because I can't think what happens there, often I'm not going to work it. It's often going to scupper the whole book, really, that I'm, oh yeah, I've still not worked it out. And I've written 60,000 words and I've still not got any idea where it goes from here. So yeah, so I plot it all out. But say the book I've just written, first draft I've just finished, that one, yeah, some of those subplots don't work. I think I've put a bit too much focus on some characters over others. There's some bits that I didn't expect to enjoy half as much as I have, that I think, oh right, that feels more like the heart of that plot point. So it will change completely, despite the fact it was beautifully plotted out and color coded and everything on my spreadsheet. So it's a shame.
It's funny because we've chatted to a few authors who and we've asked the question about planning or pantsing, and they've said that if they plan too much, then it almost takes away that the kind of will to write. Like they kind of get bored almost if they
like they've already told the story. Yeah, exactly. And that's not something that you've ever experienced. You've never had that feeling at all.
No, I'm the other way. I think I like to know when I'm sitting down that I know what I'm writing next, because I do find every day you're sort of having to kid yourself that you're making stuff up, aren't you? Every day you sit at your PC and you're cold, you're starting cold, whereas you finished the day before and you were quite probably quite enjoying it, and then you're starting cold and you're like, what am I doing again? Who am I? What's this about? And the fact that I've got something it's a scene here, it features these characters, this is where the emotional start and end point is, and these are the three things you've got to get in. That sounds quite rigid, but actually within that there's a lot of flexibility. I might move the location of a scene, I might humour will come up as I'm writing it I'm not expecting, but the fact I know I'm not going to get lost or I'm not going to write myself into a hole is quite freeing.
So you really plan to that level then. You'll have like a chapter, you'll know what's going to go into it, what emotions going in, what the three things you need to hit, what information has to come up of it. And you do that each chapter for the whole plan before you even start to write it.
I have for this one, and I have before, because I write ensemble. So most of my books have been ensemble books. So they've had multiple narrators, so 7 narrators, 8 narrators with overlapping story arcs. So because of the nature of the one I'm writing now, having so many narrators, it's just really, really important. Whereas the book that's coming out in a few weeks, that one only has 1 narrator, and then I think you can be much more fluid in seeing what happens when you haven't got to make it overlap. Because with an ensemble one, I think they work best if every scene is not just a scene of that person narrating it, that it also does, I said, pull in bits of other people's story arcs. There's jokes, there's irony from the fact you as a reader know that what's happening in that scene is the exact opposite of what that person had the scene before wanted to happen, and all that kind of thing. And that's where a lot of the good bits are for me. So that means a lot of plotting. But as I say, most of my friends don't work like that. I think it's just a personal preference thing. And it's still, as I say, it will still change completely, depressingly, by the time it's finished.
And once you've got that first draft done, is the second draft quite a meticulous draft, or are you someone that will go through a number of drafts before you're happy to even show it to your agent or editor?
Yeah, I'll probably do at least one more draft. I'll definitely do at least one more draft, but they might be more than that. It's probably going to be 2 of this one. And again, I plot out what needs to happen on my spreadsheet before I start diving in. Okay. So I kind of annotate the spreadsheet with extra cells, etc. And then I'll get to my editor, and then there will be another huge edit, which often takes longer than the initial draft. So I'm lucky. Doesn't always feel lucky, but I'm lucky that my editor is extremely focused on the editorial side. He's not someone who's just going to send it to the copy edit fairly soon. And often that means huge changes. So I'm always really pleased at that point, because it's really good to be able to work with someone else, because that's the first point someone will read it. That's not me. And it's really nice to have someone else's perspective. But also I've learned that you can really improve things at that stage. So yeah, the last book I wrote, it took longer. The edits after it went to my editor, it took longer than they did it did to write the original book.
Right.
But again, that's not the experience of a lot of friends. So there's such a range of experiences.
And how do you feel when you get those notes back from the editor? Is it like I think we've chatted to a few folk again who've got, you always have that kind of initial, that's nonsense. That's nonsense. Doesn't understand my book at all. Crap, and then you put it down in a drawer, and then you go back to the next day and you think, well, okay, I'll change that. And by the end of it, you've changed all of them. Is that the kind of experience you have, or is it more of a back and forth?
No, because I think I'm happy to take the feedback if I know it's from a position that he wants to make it better. Mm-hmm. So at this point, it's our book. It's going to get published, or probably going to get published, and he's going to help me make it as good as it can be. So I think because all the other edits have gone well, I think I trust that, and I've got that relationship with my editor that it's, I think if he was saying it's not good enough, and this is why, that would feel completely different.
Yeah.
But generally, it's much more, you could tighten this bit. That character art's not strong enough. There's much more payoff you could do here. And I think the level of insight, as I say, he brings after months of just being me in my own head. I'm just so pleased to talk to someone else about it. Some of it doesn't make sense straight away. So we usually have an editorial call about the notes after I've had a couple of days just to absorb them. And then usually we'll have some follow-up questions and things. But as I say, in every book so far, it's got so much better at that stage. So I really do trust the process.
Yeah.
And your new book that is coming out in July is All the Fun of the Fair. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? Yes.
So that's a bit different for me. So it's a coming-of-age story set in the summer of 1996 about an 11-year-old girl who lives in a small town in the north of England. And the fair is the only good thing that happens in the town every year. So she's never been allowed to go because her older sister died at the fair before she was born. But this year she's determined she's going to be able to get to the fair. So that's her mission. And it's all told through her eyes. And there's basically quite a complex, there's the kind of surface level story of her trying to get to the fair, but there's also this kind of undercurrent story of you as the reader piecing together other things that have happened that she maybe isn't aware of in terms of the death of her older sister and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's another comedy. Really fun to write, but I've never written from just one narrator's perspective before, so that was quite exciting. And the fact it's quite limited, that it's a story told completely from a child's perspective, but that a lot of what she sees, she views differently to how we might view it. And a lot of the challenges and opportunities that came with it was really good fun, actually, and a bit of a headache.
Yeah, I was going to ask about exactly that. Telling a story from the perspective of an 11-year-old. How did you get in that head? How did you find that voice?
In terms of finding the voice, I don't know. I think maybe I've got a bit of a case of arrested development. I can still remember. It feels, I don't know, things from that age still feel more powerful. Things from childhood. I think there's quite a nostalgic aspect to this book. And I set it in 96 because I don't think I could write from the perspective as a child now, because I just think the world has changed so completely. But I don't know. The feelings of fear of missing out, the feeling of how important everything was, the idea that this fair comes to town once a year and it's just that glamorous kind of thing. And if you don't go this year, the next year is so far away. All those things felt, I don't know, I think I can still remember them. So the voice itself it just came quite naturally. And again, I think it gets stronger through the edits. I think the more you write a character, that's part of the reason why it's so good to get to the end of the first draft, because you know so much more by the end than you do at the beginning. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I think a lot of the good stuff that comes in my books is definitely later on, because the more you know the character, the more you tighten it up.
And what was it, you've written your first few books, and as you say, there were kind of multiple voices, points of view and stuff. What was it that made you want to dial down to one? And I suppose, where did the idea come from? What was it that made you think, I want to try something a little bit different this time?
I think I wanted to see if I could do it with the one character, because so much of the humour in my previous books, as I say, is the chapter would end from one narrator's perspective, and it was that kind of the overlapping nature provided a lot of the humour and a lot of the tension. So I think there was an element of, can I do something a bit more stripped down? I think I'd always wanted to tell a bit of a mystery, and I thought telling a mystery through, it's another way of doing an unreliable narrator, isn't it? That mystery of, for whatever reason that you don't understand, she isn't clear what has happened, and that just her putting a different interpretation on events than the adults in her life would put on events. It was just a really different way of doing things. So yeah, and also in my previous books, I've always had a child narrator in each book, and they tended to get quite good feedback. And that's, I don't generally read my reviews, to be honest, but my editor and various people told me that always my child narrators got really good feedback. So it's quite nice. So I was thinking, could I sustain it for a whole book?
Yeah, nice.
And obviously your books are comedies, and one thing I was, writing comedy anyway can be difficult, but finding a book that actually makes you laugh as opposed to just sort of smile as you're reading it is quite I love it when it happens, because it's not a common thing to happen. I mean, is it just something that comes naturally, or do you sort of hone the jokes through the edits, or how does that? Or was it just the editor, as you say, saying, actually what you're writing here is humorous, so that's what you should concentrate on?
Yeah, I think I don't tend to write much slapstick type stuff. It's much more, the humour comes from the characters, I think, and it comes from the characters generally not getting what they want and being their own worst enemies. And that is probably a theme with all my books. And that stuff comes quite naturally to me, but it still came as a bit of a shock, as I say, when I was first told that the humour side was probably one of the standout elements of the books I was writing, because I don't know, like you say, books are a really hard medium to make people laugh in, and also it's so subjective. So I have no doubt that there will be as many people who think my books aren't funny as would think they are funny. That's just the nature of the beast. You just got to live with that if you write comedy. And I think in terms of reviews and stuff, as I say, I don't actually look at them, but when I have gone on just to have a little sneaky peek, they do tend to be quite polarized. You like things or you don't. So it's I have to make myself laugh. And I have to be able to stand by it. And sometimes, as part of editing process, my editor will come up with some hilarious things, and I'll think, yeah, that's got to go in as well. And sometimes he might come up with things, and I think that's not quite my voice, so it's staying out. So I think at the end of the day, I've got to be able to make myself laugh, which is actually quite hard when you've worked on a manuscript for several months.
I totally agree. I think for me, writing a comedy piece or whatever is I find it the hardest thing to write. I think, I don't know if it's a thriller or a horror, whatever, you can do passages that something about the voice or the tone of the whole book has to fit for the comedy to work, and I find that so hard to do. So I'm always very impressed by folk who are able to do a funny book, because I know how hard it is, and I feel it's kind of underrated almost, because I think people often think comedy is easy. It's that kind of classic, it's not as hard it's easy to make someone laugh than scared, and I don't think that's true. I think it's a lot easier to make someone scared or jump or tense or whatever. I think that's easier than making someone genuinely laugh at something. So I think that whatever your secret is, I think it's very obvious. I think you always do have a kind of innate gift for it, and that's quite cool, and I'm a little bit jealous.
Yeah, as I say, I think it's really, I think you just have to accept, or just whereas if you write a really, really good thriller, probably most thriller lovers will like it. I think you have to just move away from the idea you can please everyone.
Totally, yeah, and have the confidence to say, this isn't not going to be for everyone, and that's as long as I make myself laugh, I'll make someone else laugh, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I was listening to an audiobook back of when I listened to a book that I'd submitted a couple of years ago, and I listened to it back, and I'd forgotten it, and there were some bits that made me laugh. And I was walking the dog and I was laughing. And I was a little bit embarrassed. I had my headphones on, so it's fine. But I thought, that's fine. Our audience of one, and it's me, and I've made myself laugh.
And did your years in HR? I imagine you've come across some colourful characters when working in HR. I mean, did that help? Does that help inform your characters in your books?
Definitely. I think my books are mainly about conflict and people behaving badly under pressure, and I think that definitely comes from HR, because I think you see people at their most vulnerable and you see them at their worst, and and HR don't generally go along when everything's going really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got a lot from that. And I think also just the defensiveness. As I say, in my books, I don't believe there's any bad guys in my books, though I know other people would disagree with that. But I just think people can behave really, really badly because they're feeling scared, vulnerable, attacked. And then people can dig in. And there's an awful lot of that in my books. And that's definitely from HR. You just see it. People making a bad situation worse because they can't quite let it go, or they've got, their ego to protect, or they're furious. And that stuff all went straight into my books. Yeah.
And I'd read an interview with you that you talked about imposter syndrome, and that was something that you felt that you suffered from, and I think probably a lot of writers would agree with that. That's something that they also suffer from. And I just wondered what your views on that are, and any tips you might have for people out there who are suffering from it, how to get past it.
That's a nice question. I think a lot of it comes from wanting something so much. So I think, if you want a job in another industry, you generally can get in, start at the bottom and work your way up. Whereas in this job, you get nothing. You get no feedback for a really long time. And you're just in your own head saying, am I there yet? Am I good enough? And then the magic thing happens and someone says, yes, you are, this is good enough, we want to publish it. And then I think because you want something so much, that comes with its own challenges, and the feeling that you're going to be exposed and people are going to be commenting on your books and all this stuff that's only been in your head for such a long time. I mean, I never really told anyone I wrote books at the early stages either. So I didn't tell friends or family, and all of a sudden everyone's reading your books. So I think it's quite a strange experience. In terms of the imposter syndrome, I think on a day-to-day basis when you're writing, just accept that what you're writing is going to feel like it's going to be rubbish. And that doesn't mean that, you're not good enough, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to write a good book in the end. But if you're comparing what you're writing that day to a really crafted piece of prose that someone else has written in a book that's been edited 5 times, or your own book that's been edited 5 times, it's not going to compare. And so much of this is just outrunning your own fear. And it isn't that some people are born writers. I think I had that for a little while, that whole, I stopped writing for a bit and I started again. Am I a proper writer? And then you read about other people who go, I couldn't not write. I couldn't not write for a day. And I can't be a proper writer. Well, proper writer it's a strange thing. I've now been a professional writer for nearly 5 years, and, it's just the same. You deal with the same challenges. So just focusing on the work and trying not to focus too much on your view of the work is all you can do. I think. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. I think you see these quotes from people, don't you? You have to write every day, Christmas Day, take yourself away to a room and write for 10 minutes, and you think, and then suddenly you've got this bar that's been set by someone, and you're like, well, if I don't do that, does that mean I'm not a proper writer? I'm not as good as them? And it's just nonsense, because as you say, it's not about how much you write, it's about what you want to do, how you write, and what you want to do with writing, and that drive to write, etc. And so so I think that's a really good point, I think. And it's easy to get lost in that, especially as a writer, when you're kind of by yourself at a desk in your head all day long. It's easy to get kind of caught up in it all and to lose sight of what really is important.
Definitely. And I think by the time when you get published, it's a strange industry in that, obviously debuts are prized as a new voice. I'm imagining you've talked about this with other people quite a bit, but that whole, again, you don't just start on the ladder and build your way up, but you are a debut, that suddenly you are an interesting new voice. There's interest from around the world that you don't expect often, and things like that. People are asking for interviews and publicity, and it's literally from zero to to beyond what you would ever expecting, or in my case. And that can be, take a real while to get used to. And then, of course, it can also drop back a little bit as well, which is then another challenge. So the resilience side of being an author, I think, is not to be underestimated. But I would still always do this job. So, I would never say try and put anyone off, but certainly it's been much more of a mental test, I think, than I ever would have expected.
I mean, it's true actually that you get all the advice. There's loads of books or guidance on the internet about how do you find an agent, how do you get published. But once that happens, there's not a lot of advice out, for a debut author or published author, there isn't a lot of advice out there as to what is going to happen at that stage. You sort of can think in your head, oh, right, I've made it, but then you suddenly don't know what's in front of you, which I guess lends itself to the syndrome, as we were discussing there a bit as well.
Definitely. And I think, you're learning, but you're learning based on what other people. I think projecting success is really important as well in this industry. I think people want to be seen to be successful because that makes it's more than more than in HR. If you were having a bad day at work in HR, you'd probably colleagues. You weren't as. Whereas I think in this job, people, if they have their disappointments, they're dropped by publishers, etc. They don't put that on social media. Mm-hmm. Some people do, but so what you just see is the really positive side, and mm-hmm. then you see everyone else coping really, really well with things. When actually, when you scratch the surface, a lot of what people are dealing with is the same. And a lot of the advice that you're given in the rest of life, but don't judge your own insides by other people's outsides. I'd say that goes with being an author, but like 20 times over. If you think everyone else is always having a great writing day, it's not the case. If you think that author over there with 20 books written, still loves sitting down at the desk every day and always has a productive day and knows where they're going, it's not true.
Absolutely. So we've got All the Fun of the Fair coming out soon, but you were mentioning you've got the first is it the first draft of the next novel that you've just finished? And do you have, when you were signed, was it a one book deal or have you had to get a new deal every book, or was it a multi-book deal?
In the UK, so I was signed with a 2-book deal, and then I got another 2-book deal.
Right.
And hopefully, I would hope that I'll continue writing for my publisher past that, because they're very, it's very focused on the long term and stuff. So we're already talking about book ideas for the next ones. Brilliant. So that's quite nice to hear. Yeah.
And does that help out, going back, I suppose, to the sort of structure of it, to know that, right, I've got to get this done by this date? Does that actually help you? Because I know with some other authors that we've spoken to, that isn't always helpful because they've had, 5 years to write that debut and then suddenly they're under pressure to get another book out within a year or whatever. But do you find that helpful?
I like it. I like knowing who I'm writing for. I mean, the only challenge with it is if you're writing under contract, you can't, you could just write a book and present it at the end of that time and go, here's my next book, but it might not be what the publishers are looking for. Mm-hmm. And, they are really committed in terms of trying to help me build a brand. So there's a lot of ideas that I'll go to with my editor and he'll say, that's maybe not as relatable. That might not be as much what we're looking for in a helpful way, but there can be quite a lot of back and forth before we land on an idea. And that's maybe it comes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, that I don't think I have a clue what the market is looking for. I think I try, but I still don't. So it's sometimes quite helpful to have someone say, the audience for that is like 4 people. And that's, and then we might be 2 of them, but it's still like 4 people. I mean, a couple of books ago, I wrote a literary book set at a poker table, and it's, no one's going to want to read that. Poker players aren't going to read that. They don't read. It's quite helpful to have someone going, no, that's probably not, it's not going to help you from a career perspective, because I have got one eye on the commercial success, and I want to keep doing this job. I don't want to have to go back to HR because I've only sold copies to my friends. So I always think that input is really valuable, but it can delay things. So for some authors, they'd hate that. I know people who would much prefer to not have a contract, write exactly what they want, completely on their own, without input, without anyone kind of sort of taking away the magic of that private time. And again, that's a completely different way of working as well.
Yeah, I think I totally get that, because I think for me it's definitely a balance in that writing is a wonderful thing, but if you want to make a career out of it, you want to write books that sell, and so as you say, you want to have one eye on the commercial market, and it's not selling out to write something which you hope will be successful. And on the flip side, you get people like Donna Tartt, who there'll be 10 years or so between books, and there'll be but there'll be massive hits, and she obviously writes something that she wants to write, and there's not like I guess there's always a commercial side, I suppose, but it's not like you have to write, as you say, a second book next year, and it has to be a thriller, and it has to have these characters in this town, and and neither one is a bad thing. And I think there's often a lot of people who look down on one type of book over the other. I think it's important not to feel that you're selling out or you're not writing like a proper author, etc.
Yeah, and I think I see it like a Venn diagram. Like there's a circle of books that I'd quite like to write, and there's a circle of books that my publishing house would like from me. And where can we get that bit in the middle that actually gives me what I want and gives them what they want? And that's where we've been to this point. And I imagine we can stay there, but then maybe it just takes a little bit more work than when you're just pleasing yourself, really. And I think, you're right. I think when you're Donna Tartt, you can write exactly what you want and it will be a massive success without needing to think about anything else. And and
also you've got the money from your previous massive hit to live off for 10 years while you write your next magnum opus. You don't need to worry about paying the bills.
Exactly. It's a funny thing when we talk about money in this industry because, it really matters. It influences your choices and it influences so much because, if you want to do it as your career, I know there's a lot of people who do it as a sideline who don't need the money because they've got other routes of income. But, I think it is reasonable to kind of want to be able to, earn enough to live.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a reasonable expectation.
To eat. It's nice to eat.
What was the last book that you read?
I wrote them down because I knew you asked this. So it was Careless by Kirsty Capes, which I just finished last night, which is really good. Commercial fiction about a coming of age story, actually, by gets told from a girl in care who gets pregnant. Really, really good. I highly recommend that book.
Nice. And what about the last film that you watched?
It was Promising Young Women.
Right. Yeah. That was a possibility. We were going to watch that maybe on Saturday night and we didn't in the end. But is it one you'd recommend watching?
Yeah, I would. It's unusual and really, interesting. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
Nice.
And the last TV show or the TV show that you're watching just now?
It was Mayor of Easttown. Just watched
it. Right. No spoilers. I haven't even started. Stephen King has actually spoiled it for me already by tweeting out whoever the murderer is or something. But I'm trying desperately to forget that I saw that. But thanks, Stephen. You're not coming on the podcast.
Apart from it was good. It was good.
We finished watching it last night, and I thought it was excellent. It was one of these. It didn't bring anything massively new, but it was just done really well. And I thought she was amazing in it, and I thought the ending it wrapped everything up really nicely. I was really pleased with the last episode.
I would echo that.
And the very, very last.
Well, I was going to jump in first before that and say I read on your website as well that you, you mentioned you play poker quite a lot, but you're also a fan of board games as well in your spare time. Is that right? And what's your current favourite board game? Because both Tarek and I are big board game fans. So that's
really? Yeah. Well, it's quite hard at the moment because obviously you can't play with anyone. Exactly. So it's 2-player games at the moment generally. So 2-player games, generally playing a lot of Ticket to Ride and Power Grid are my probably 2 favourite. And my favourite game that I recommend to everyone is called Camel Up.
All right, I've not heard of that.
Never heard of Camel Up. No.
It's a game about racing camels in the desert where you bet on camels, and it's not actually about how the camels win. You basically get rewarded based on how you're betting as opposed to how other people are betting. So it's a really good game. You can play it on lots of different levels, and it gets really quite intense when I play it with certain friends. But
nice!
Excellent.
Is that quite a quick fire round type game?
It's probably about half an hour, 45 minutes. Yeah.
Nice.
And
I'm good to.
I play it with some people I used to play poker with, and professional poker players. We play it very seriously.
Nice.
For £1, I should say.
Real money as well. Okay, nice. This is
play
serious.
For £1, yeah.
Excellent. No, I'll definitely look into that one.
And the very, very final thing we do is quick fire, either or. And as I always say, there's no right answer apart from one. But we'll start off with Nick Hornby or David Nichols.
Nick Hornby, I'd say.
So nice. TV or cinema?
TV.
Night owl or early bird?
Early bird. Neither really. I've got a very small window. Got 8 hours in the middle of the day.
A fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Fancy restaurant.
And last one, real book or ebook?
Ebook all the way.
Made Tarek very happy.
Absolutely correct answer. Fantastic. What a fantastic answer. Why ebook? Why don't you name me some of the amazing qualities of an ebook?
Well, just because you can take so many books on holiday. I read so much, and I don't think I'm as obsessed. I see, bookstagrammers and people that, other authors. Everyone loves the copies of their books, and I don't know. I'm just not wedded to the thing, and I just like to get clutter out of my house. So I still look at my shelves downstairs and want to get rid of all my books. I can't, because the only thing is I'll keep all the copies of my books and my foreign editions, then I'll look like a massive narcissist. Also, this is an interesting one. So my husband can only see out of one eye, and he finds it much easier to read from an ebook as we share, an account. So there's practical reasons why it's.
That's another string to his bow. I hadn't even known that. That's just fantastic.
He says this thing about reading in bed at an angle. I don't know exactly, but it's much easier to read in bed than ebook. Apparently,
it's definitely much easier to read in bed with an ebook. I agree.
For sure, yeah. Also, especially if you're Marco and you hate any possible crease on the spine of a book, and you kind of open it like that, and you just peer down the line of the words and try and.
I just like my shelves to look like new books, Tarek, that's all. It just takes me years to read one book, that's all.
Well, I think I knew from the moment we started chatting with Caroline that she was a really smart, intelligent woman, and I think I was proven right, basically, when she sided with myself in the ebook.
Yeah. If this is your first episode, then you won't know that we ask every guest that real book, ebook question, and I think it's fair to say the majority share by some way is in favour of real books, Tarek.
I think it's me and Caroline now. Yeah, there's so many reasons why ebooks are just the best way to read a book, Marco. Go on holiday, reading in bed.
I mean, I do agree. Like, I'm not anti ebook. I like a real.
It's one. I'm afraid in this current
you have to pick a side.
You have to be one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, fair enough.
You can't like both.
Exactly. That's not allowed. I thought that was a really interesting chat with Caroline, though. I mean, what she was saying about, having to outrun your own fear, really, when you're writing, I think is something that as I said in the podcast, it's something that I sometimes struggle with. You can kind of get bogged down in the little details when you're writing and try and sort of make that little section that you're writing perfect. And that can, if you don't succeed at that moment, then that can cause doubt about the whole thing that you're trying to write. Yeah. You are better just trying to push through everything, and at the end you've got something written, you've got something there that you can then improve on.
For me, it's the writing is all in the rewriting.
Yeah,
for sure. Mm-hmm. It's the hardest part is absolutely getting that first bit down on paper, and like a few folk have said now, is that almost expecting that feeling of this is just crap. Mm-hmm. That's going to be there. You're going to feel that, but that's a thing to expect and to almost welcome, and then because if you push past that, you'll be fine. And it is just pushing past that.
Definitely. So thanks very much to Caroline for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate her taking the time to do that. And as I said at the start, All the Fun of the Fair is just out, and you can get that now from your local bookshop or order it online. We'll put a link to a place that you can buy it online in the podcast description. And we've got another great guest next week.
We do indeed. Next week, we are chatting with Mr. M.J. Arledge, who is an author of various crime novels starring Helen Grace. And he's also had a successful run in TV. He wrote for EastEnders, Monarch of the Glen, Silent Witness. He's had quite a varied writing career. And
it was really interesting speaking to him about, the differences between working in that TV industry and working as an author. And I think what he brought from his time in the TV industry into his writing for himself was really interesting. And it sounds like in TV you need to be quite forthright and sort of be sure about your ideas and pitch them.
Skin.
Yeah, exactly, and have a very hard skin. And I think that definitely helps as an author as well. So we chat to him about all of that, and it's a really interesting but also fun episode. He was really good fun to chat to as well.
It's a really good laugh, and he's definitely worked in some pretty high profile stuff, and it's interesting to see the behind the scenes of how that's all kind of made, which is excellent.
Yeah. So please do tune in for that one. Before we go, if you enjoyed the episode or have enjoyed past episodes, please do take time to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you listen to. That really helps us stay in the charts, and which in turn helps us continue to get great guests. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page One, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.